Howdy, everyone. We're actually on take two of doing this. You may have some really great answers to the questions that we're talking about. Um, Last time I published anything, I was sitting in my RV and it was at a park enjoying myself, sunning myself a little bit. And I talked about what I was going to do in the coming week. Well, that coming week is now last week. Um, and I commented that I was headed off to SampleCon and that based on the folks that I knew were going to be there and the agenda that I had seen, I anticipated that the conference was going to be an excellent conference. Well, now that it's over, I can report it actually far exceeds my expectations. It was one of the best conferences I've been to. Really enjoyed the conversations, really enjoyed the content. There were a lot of new folks that I hadn't seen at conferences before. And so there were different conversations than what we've had. So I thought what I'd do is I'd actually get folks who I treasure, and we're at SampleCon together and just talk about the experience, talk about the event, and why I think actually, based on the conversations we've had on the crisis of confidence and trust, that we're actually moving forward. And that was one of my big takeaways from the conference. So if you don't know, Rachel Altmont is the CEO of SampleCon. Um, you've seen Bob before. Bob is actually chairman of the SampleCon board. And Chuck Miller, if you don't know Chuck, you should know Chuck. What's wrong with you? He is the CEO of DM2. So we're going to do two things. One, we're going to talk about SampleCon, the event, and how it was organized and why it actually was so good this year. And then we're going to just go to some of the content. I think we're giving you an inside baseball view. The group of us are also on the SampleCon Global Digital Quality um, steering committee, and we get together and we just chat, and it's fun. So we thought we'd do that on camera just to see what came out of it. So, Rachel, why don't we start with you? If you don't mind, not everybody knows about SampleCon. Not everybody is privy to the specialness that it is. Um, would you mind, telling people about it?
So, SampleCon is an organization that really has the goal of just bringing industry thought leaders together, focused on how we have honest conversations and push the industry forward in whichever direction it's going, depending on where we are as a industry. And so we started out as a very, very small conference. The first event was only 60 people, I believe. And we've now grown to 275 to 300, and that's pretty much where we cap at. We intentionally ensure that our annual event is a more intimate gathering, that it is representative of the industry at a global level so that we can drive the best conversations. And one of the things that I I have a love-hate relationship with SampleCon about is that the number one reason people come is the networking at the conference. And so every year the challenge is how do we ensure that we facilitate that high quality networking with ensuring that we're also having the conversations that we need to be having. Um, and so we really focus on getting the right voices in the room. Every year, we're between 30 and 40% totally new first time attendees at SampleCon, which is exactly where we want to be because those new voices are what's pushing our industry forward and helping us to ensure we're evolving.
Yeah. So two things on this one. First of all, there's a meme going around that this was the last SampleCon. Is this the last SampleCon? And I know that it wasn't. Um, would would you like to respond to the meme?
There is, we opened SampleCon this year with a debate around the topic of synthetic versus human answers. And I challenged both of the speakers to really push the limits on what they were doing. And so Patrick Homer at Sint took my words to heart and opened with a slide that said the last SampleCon. with context around that, he meant that it's the last SampleCon where the majority of our conversation is going to be about human answers. Um, and the goal of this session was really not to have anybody's personal viewpoints be the driver of the conversation, but just to push our thoughts as an industry and push ourselves honestly to the brink of what does this mean of where we are as an industry right now. And so he successfully did that. But this is not the end of SampleCon. In fact, I think it's a launching pad for kind of the next iteration of where we go as an organization and where the conversations in the industry go.
Okay. So, you know, following on from the debate, I want to also talk about the content and the discussions. And I would argue SampleCon's always been great. It's always been, forefront of things. But it's also morphed, as you mentioned, and it's really about a lot of different things. This year in particular, the discussions were wide-ranging and important. How did you kind of shift? I would say, I don't want to talk bad about any other sample cons because they've been awesome, but it seemed to go up a level this year. How did you guys achieve that, both in terms of the content, the folks attending, and just the event in general?
So I think from a speaker standpoint, and I can't take credit for this idea because it was actually Bob's. But when we met with every year, we meet with the content committee, and their job is to help kind of identify what are the trends, where we're going as an industry, um, who are the people we really want to make sure are on stage. And we decided to kind of throw caution to the wind this year and take a totally different approach and put no scope and boundaries around what you could submit on as far as topics this year. And we did a call to the industry that was tell us what are the things that need to be discussed? What are the challenges? What are the opportunities? Where, what are the topics that you think people aren't talking about that they need to be talking about? And the result was overwhelming. We received significantly more submissions than we've ever received from a much broader pool of speakers, many who had never attended SampleCon before. Um, and it allowed us then to step back and say, what are the themes that are carrying through the industry and who are the voices that we think will carry this conversation forward? And so we had a wide range of speakers this year, from people who have spoken on SampleCon, at SampleCon since the beginning, to people who weren't even in the industry yet when SampleCon started. And that variety brought forward a really honest dialogue. And the other piece that we shifted, and some of this was borrowed from experiences at other events, but we've always offered something called collaboration labs, which was the goal
Mhm.
of facilitating networking at the conference and allowing people to dive deeper into topics. This year, instead of um, breaking them out and making them optional, the areas that we felt would lend themselves best to the collaboration labs, we went right into the collaboration labs as a full room. So, based on the table you sat at that day, you were given a question or you were given an industry leader at your table to dive deeper into the topic and then to share what your group talked about and your views with the room as a whole. And it allowed for that conversation, especially on the first day, to set the tone that everyone has a stake in where we're going as an industry. And I think that really um, it changed the feel of the conference, and I think it allowed for those who were new specifically at the conference to feel very invested in what was happening in the conversations.
So, Bob,
You know,
oh, go ahead.
I sorry to interrupt, John. Uh,
How
yeah, I
dare
think it
you?
starts. I think it starts too. I mean, you opened, Rachel, by saying one of the things our attendees say frequently is they appreciate the networking, and that's magic as well because it ensures that there's a lot of decision makers at the event, and so we view it as kind of our opportunity and challenge to put really compelling content on the stage. And I think it starts with Rachel's willingness to try new things and having a board that's excited about that mandate
Mhm.
and excited to try new things and push the envelope. And so this year especially, I thought it was fun. There were new formats like the debate that you mentioned about the last SampleCon, Rachel. I've always wanted
The
to see
debate was not about the
a
last
formal.
SampleCon.
uh, but
It
it
shows
was
how I
also
roll
fun in
with the
this.
punches.
It was also fun in the sense that almost all the presentations were shorter. There was a lot more dialogue and a lot more
Yeah.
access to the presenters, and I thought that that worked really well this year.
I think that one of the things that we realized in doing events in, what I call the post-COVID world, right, is that we all have much shorter attention spans than we used to.
Yeah.
And the challenge from a conference standpoint is how do you keep the audience engaged? And for us, because the majority of the people who come are decision makers and they're coming to to meet and do business deals while they're at SampleCon, how do we keep them in the room and keep them engaged in those conversations? And so, um, every year I love that the board challenges me to change something about the conference. You're never going to come to a SampleCon and have the same experience twice. You're actually never going to have the same experience at SampleCon from day one to day three. It's always going to be slightly different. Um, and one of the other pieces that we tried this year that I think actually worked incredibly well was while it didn't feel like it all the time, we actually pulled back on the content a little bit this year and incorporated more networking time for attendees, and facilitated networking time. So it's always an experience. You never know what you're going to get at SampleCon. One year it might be axe throwing, another year it might be live band karaoke. This year it was um, ice skating, and haiku typewriter, poets who were there to engage with you. And so everything is about how do we break barriers down? Because as an industry, the only way we improve and we ensure our place in the future is to work together and to find ways to collaborate, to
Well,
drive the competition.
yeah, I think that's actually important because all conferences have social events and all this other stuff. But this one in particular, I think the conversations continued during the social events. They're well received, um, and it actually plays a role in the thing. Now, I know the only complaint you got also was how far away it was, but I'm going to actually put a positive on that. It's out in the middle of nowhere. You're not going off site. There are restaurants on site. It's a beautiful location in Lake Oconee. Um, we took over the hotel. It's all about the event and it's all about being there and doing what you needed to do. Um, One final question on it, and this comes, as we all participate in the Global Data Quality Initiative. Um, what role do both Rachel and Bob do you see for SampleCon in the larger debate?
You want me to go first?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so one thing I just want to comment on the location. One thing you will
Remember, I said
always
the
find with
location
Sam,
ultimately was great.
it was great. And actually it's a selling point and something I'm very proud of, which is why I want to circle back to that. You will always find that SampleCon is never going to be in a city center. And it's by design because by putting people at hotel properties that are more resorts that are slightly not always as isolated as we were this year, but slightly more isolated, it ensures that everybody is staying there and you can't walk the hallway of the hotel without seeing somebody who's part
Yeah.
of the event. And there's something really contagious about that kind of experience. It's really fun to see from day one to day three kind of the change in people waving to each other and the comfort level that grows out of that. But
Well, imagine just
my
going
view,
to a resort. I think you said there were 10 hotel rooms that weren't us. Imagine going to a resort and, yay, I'm at a research conference.
I felt very bad for the families who were on spring break who got to learn a lot about market research. But on the role that SampleCon plays in not just the data quality conversation, but in the challenges that we face as an industry, we're really uniquely positioned to facilitate conversations because I don't have members and I'm not beholden to have conversations that steer the discussion in certain ways. We are free to have for people to have strong opinions on our stage, to raise their hand and say, I have a new idea and I want to challenge the norm of the industry. And that's the beauty, I think, in where we sit in the ecosystem of data insights. Um,
I see SampleCon as an important bridge. I mean, there's a lot of practitioners at the event, because of the networking, people who may or may not be aware or involved in things like GDQ. And I see the conversations we have at the event as a way to bridge between, some of the bigger challenges and ideas in the industry, as well as some of the things that that kind of day-to-day practitioners are thinking about. And I think as a group, the entire board and Rachel are really committed to being that bridge, and that's what makes the discussion so good. And so I think, we take that opportunity very seriously as a way to kind of be a place to drive conversation towards solutions, that's unique.
mhm. And I challenge our board every year that, everyone who joins my board, they're there because they are invested in the future of data insights. And there is absolutely commercial interest for everyone on my board, but every single one of them believes that that commercial interest stops at a certain point because they want to be part of facilitating these good, honest conversations. And I hear from especially new attendees each year how it feels like they can come actually have an honest conversation. Sometimes some attendees feel like they can eavesdrop and learn in a way that they couldn't learn in other places. And that's success. If we can leave our commercial objectives at the door and priorities and be able to challenge each other in the honest conversations, we're all going to be more successful in the end.
Yeah, yeah. Before we get off the organization and the conference, one final note. Because of Armageddon that we heard about from TSA lines in Atlanta, we did end the conference a little bit early. Some of that content will be coming back that we didn't get through or that folks
Mhm.
didn't get through. So
We had three sessions that and speakers who were very kind in understanding the challenges that the attendees were facing with um, the alerts we were getting with 4-hour waits at Atlanta. And so those will be recorded and shared as webinars with the industry. And those speakers will also be coming back and
yeah.
joining us on stage in 27.
One thing I will say is it did not take us 4 hours to get through TSA. It turned out not to be as bad when we got there, but those
But we
were
got
pretty
there
good.
later in the day. The people who
That
went
is
early in the
correct.
morning did have much longer waits.
That is correct. So up until now, Chuck has just been a pretty face on the
Yeah.
on this. I want to bring him into the conversation and sort of broaden it to the various things we talked about at SampleCon. Chuck, what were kind of the important takeaways that you had? What did you hear that either you agreed with or didn't agree with
Yep.
that you wanted to bring up?
Yeah. Well, I guess first following up on, the relevance of SampleCon, the role it plays and all that, what I really like about it is it's a very focused discussion around sample and data quality, quant data quality. A lot of conferences have, a wide range of topics, because we have a wide range of subjects that we deal with in the industry.
Yeah.
But this is such a focused set of subject matter that, I really like it. And, this year, AI synthetic samples, all of that really came to the fore a little bit more in the content. I think that, Bob, Rachel, correct me, but I would say half of the subject matter we discussed, if not more, probably included something around AI synthetic samples, the role that those may play in the future. I think one of the interesting things is that, there were a lot of people that are experimenting, working with, in various capacities. It doesn't sound yet like there are very many commercial applications that, people are using repeatedly and all of that. But, that said, it does seem like, you know, tons of exploration and acknowledgement by everybody that this is something that is coming.
Yeah.
Or is here.
Well,
Here in different capacities,
in
right?
different
I mean,
capacities, yeah.
yeah.
One of the
Well, there
things.
wasn't.
Go ahead,
Go ahead,
Bob.
John.
I'll go and then you go. I
Yeah,
think
perfect.
one of the things that I enjoyed about the conference, about the discussion around synthetic in particular, I've been the curmudgeon, the AI curmudgeon, because I think people have gone out there and said, it's going to wash your clothes. It's going to, mop up your floors as well as take over all the data. And I noticed a shift in tone at the conference. There were, everyone who was talking about it, the most part, talked about the need for some basis underlying where things are, even if they thought you could do more with it than maybe I would agree with at this point. But there was an acknowledgement of the different types of data needed in research. And I think that was important. Now, part of it may be what you were talking about, which is, the revenue, I don't think on synthetic data in market research is there. I think Seema, who unfortunately couldn't join us today, she's the fifth member of our tribe when we get together on chat. She talks a lot about res tech, and she brought up a point that synthetic data in its entirety, not including outside of market research, is growing significant. But that includes things like training driverless cars, how to go forward, and health records, anonymizing health records and things of that nature. So whereas synthetic data, as it's called, is growing, I don't know what its revenue basis is in the market research. The other thing I would say, I think verifiable information came to the forefront. And I don't want to get into this because I only know a bit of it, but we just recently heard that the Qualtrics, Forsta, they were having trouble financing the deal. And part of it had to do with not understanding the verification of synthetic data. Now, whether that's true or not, we'll follow up with that. I'm going to do an AI section. I think that's important, but people are at least thinking about how do we actually ensure that synthetic data is giving us accurate and good answers on that. Bob, sorry, I interrupted you.
No, that's perfect. I mean, I think the two threads on synthetic that came out of the conference, by the way, when Rachel mentioned, I think earlier, that we didn't ask for any topics in the submission for speakers. And so what came back, about 60% of the submissions had to do with data quality. The majority of the rest had to do with AI, transformation of insights in some form or another. And, my takeaway is the conversations around synthetic and AI in our space were much more practical at this year's event than they have been at prior years' events. But when in the session, we asked the audience, raise your hand if you're using this every day as a large part of your business, not too many hands went up. And so it feels like a lot more practical applications, a lot more thinking and testing practical applications, certainly not the dominant form of generating data or insights in the space today, but kind of for me, it felt really, really different, the tenor and tone of how people were talking about it, 1 year on from last year's event, just much less hypothetical.
And I was going to say that it was no longer being positioned as the solution to the data quality challenge that we have as an industry, which brought me relief actually, because as an industry, I think we struggle with setting standards and norms for ourselves. And, it concerned me in 2025 that like there was this, a lot of chatter that data quality could be solved with synthetic data, but with no standards and norms in place for how you measure and evaluate synthetic data, it terrified me as a person, right? To be
Yeah.
part of an industry that is, I believe, foundationally needs to involve human answers, right? And I think I walked away from this year's conference thinking, there's really a place for each of these types of what I would call research and respondents, right, in our space. And actually, I feel strongly now that the value and the price that should be placed on human answers actually should be increasing, because synthetic data can fill a void that maybe has been pushing human answers down in terms of their value.
And it's
I think
something that in order to feed synthetic data, you need human answers. I mean,
right.
certainly it can be fed from behavioral and all of that, but anything around any sort of attitudinal needs human answers. And, it's something that you can't just build out synthetic data sets or personas and set it and forget it. It's going to continually need refreshing. And that's something that I think a lot of people are just now kind of coming to realize, that there's going to be ongoing value in ongoing human answers.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I thought was important, and I kind of joked about it at the conference, is, if you remember, we had Year of the Mobile. Somebody would proclaim it Year of Mobile in market research for
We had a
like
lot of those years.
48 years straight. I sort of think everyone is interested in synthetic data. What can it do well? What can't it do well? I sort of feel like we're probably maybe not as long as it was Year of Mobile, but I think we're going to start going into this is the year of synthetic data. No, next year's the year of synthetic data. In my opinion, there are some things that it can do very well. There are some things that it can't, and I think people are really starting to look through that, trying to find their way on that.
Yeah, I kind of just got an overall sense of how fast the industry is moving.
Yeah.
Like the conversation around synthetic, the debate was great. I've often wanted, which is a dumb idea, to have like a formal Lincoln Douglas debate at a conference, but nobody wants to be Douglas, given history. So I'm not sure that'll ever happen. But
although Douglas won the Lincoln Douglas debate,
he did. But in the long run, wasn't
he
much of a
lost it
victory.
all later. Yeah.
But that was a great kickoff, because even when we were talking about human answers, there's a great panel on behavioral data, and interesting to think about how human answers themselves, or human source data itself, could fundamentally shift so meaningfully, and it could happen very quickly. You had people proposing totally new models around data quality. You had it, a lot of very big topics on stage, or big proposals on stage, even for the topics that we tend to think of as more traditional, like how do we get human responses?
Yeah, I thought the way that it was structured, that you guys structured it, was nice, because there would be some presentations, shorter presentations, and then we bring it all together to discuss the topic. And in fact, Bob, you're the panel that you moderated on data quality, I thought also had some really interesting things come out of it, particularly the Walmart data ventures guys, talking about what they're doing, but also as a call to the industry that, if you don't get your hands around data quality, it's all over for you. They're both a big vendor, and I don't think people realize they're actually a vendor, but they're also a big buyer as well. And so to me, it's akin to Kim Dedeker in 2006, sort of doing a wake-up call. And I thought that was really appreciated. And I thought they had some interesting things to say, as did the rest of the panelists. The JD Powers guys were interesting, and the
Dan,
general Dan
Dan and
Dan from
Dan from
Acknowledge.
Acknowledge.
Yeah.
that analysis I thought was fascinating, and it really brought out some interesting aspects of needing to treat respondents appropriately, because if we've answered something 89 times and you're still thinking I'm a dentist when I'm clearly not, there's a problem.
Well, and his
Dan's going to speak
examples,
next year and
yeah,
announce he got his dental license.
He's
his
he's
dental
actually joked
license.
about that on LinkedIn. He really has. He's got to look into going to dental
But
school.
I think my takeaway from especially the data quality conversation is we have to own our role and our responsibility in the work we're doing. And there's, I think it's been a lot of passing the buck, and we can't do that anymore. It's just
Yeah.
not gonna, it doesn't work. And I appreciated that leaders from across our space were willing to get up and say, we have a responsibility, we're owning our responsibility, and we're challenging you to join us in fixing this. And it takes people willing to be vulnerable in that way to start to move the needle, I think.
They were open about stuff they've done in the past that maybe hasn't worked, and but it was, again, the big issue I've had is people are like, oh, we've got an issue, and I think the difference is people were talking about how we can make things better. I won't say solve, because that assumes everything's going to be 100% perfect, but I think they were talking about how do we move from here, and I think that was important.
One of the
Yeah.
challenges, oh, sorry, Bob, you go.
I, I was just going to say, I think something that is often lacking in these conversations is just the empathy or understanding
Mhm.
for someone else's perspective of the problem. And so one thing we tried to do really hard this year is bring different voices to the stage. So I loved uh, Mark Hardy with Walmart Data Ventures talking about how central the consumer, the customer is, the shopper, to everything they do. And given that centrality, they went out kind of outside the traditional sample industry to build something net new to get a better read that would make the customer's experience better across the enterprise. I thought it was great at the end of JD Power's presentation when Greg Wells kind of asked the room, most of my suppliers are in this room. We've upped our conversion by X. We've improved respondent experience. What else would you like us to do as we're on this journey together? And I thought it was wonderful to have a panel with we had Bridget from People Inc. and Jamie from
Yeah.
Travelers talking about the work
Mhm.
they're doing and what it's like to maybe not fully trust the data when you know what decisions are going to be made on it. And so I hope that one thing that attendees took away from the event is, hey, maybe this thing that we do every day is actually very consequential for our clients or our clients' clients. And to me, that was one of the most interesting parts of this year's event specifically, is bringing some of the client voice and some examples from, whether they're at brands or at agencies, of people have made meaningful investments in doing things better, to talk about that journey and maybe challenge all of us as practitioners to up our game and make our own investments.
Yeah,
I
I'm going to
felt
agree
like
with
our
that. I thought that was one of the most valuable things that we did content wise this
Yeah.
year, because a lot of times the people on the sampling side or at the very front of the process may interact with agencies, but don't necessarily see or hear about the end result. And I think to get a few client side folks up on stage talking about that was really valuable context for a lot of people.
And I think there
Sorry,
was a
Rachel.
higher, no, that's okay. I
Yeah.
think there was a high level of vulnerability from our
Yeah.
speakers this year,
Mhm.
in putting themselves out there in a way. They weren't trying to present perfection. They were presenting honesty and where the flaws were and how they were trying to tackle the flaws to help other people in the industry do better. And that that carried through, and it wasn't a challenge necessarily that we put to the speakers to be that way this year, but by I think opening up our submissions to be, you tell us what we need to talk about, people felt more comfortable being honest instead of trying to submit simply to get selected as a speaker this year.
I'm not going to mention it on here just because I don't know if she wants it, but I think it was Bridget who actually quantified what bad data quality is in terms of people hours and things of that nature. And it was astonishingly high. And, we think about, there's a race to the cheapest sample if you don't have any other indicators, but there's an additional cost to that. And she
Yeah,
put voice to that. And I thought that was really, really important.
I
For
think
And,
so
everybody
too.
to hear.
and look, I mean, we had a company get on stage. Harris got on stage and said they're willing to pay more for quality.
Yeah.
And and that discussion isn't happening very often, right? But it needs to be happening more. We need to be, you know, we need to be saying like there is value and here's where the value
Yeah.
is, and not just at conferences,
Yeah.
but in business discussions, having those honest conversations about what you need.
Well, I thought I'm going to push back just a little bit on that, and it's not necessarily their fault. I think companies have been saying over time that they're willing to pay more for quality. We don't necessarily find that that's the case, but it's also the case that they don't have the information they need to truly differentiate what's higher quality and what's
Mhm.
lower quality. And Bob, I apologize. I'm going to talk nicely about you. I won't do it ever again. But one of the things that came out of this was the work you're doing is actually important to this part of the discussion. Is
Yeah.
figuring out what are those metrics and trying to figure out how we measure things. And I think if we can give folks the ability to understand how different samples or different entities differ or different offerings differ,
Yeah.
then it is incumbent on those who have been saying that they're willing to pay more to pay more. Um,
Well, don't you also think though that like there's a place for paying different amounts for research depending on
yep,
what you're doing? And
absolutely.
we don't do a good job as an industry of differentiating what those points are. And and that's where I think almost synthetic data fits into this conversation, and maybe it helps facilitate the discussion we don't want to have is,
Yeah.
depending on what work you're conducting and what your, you know, what the outcome is of what that research is going to support, it's going to drive what you might pay for that sample. And that's okay.
Yeah.
If you're choosing to pay
Yeah.
less, it doesn't mean your research is lower in quality. It just has a different fit for purpose.
Well, but we also don't have a quality spectrum. You don't need everything to be at the knowledge panel or Amerispeak level. And in particular, if you're just trying to get some idea, to sort through some ideas, you don't need the highest quality sample to do that. But we don't
Right.
have that spectrum to know, where it is. And that's where I started to get, I was excited. I think we're seeing a road now to be able to
Mhm.
develop that and to develop some differentiation. I'd love it if people competed on quality, and it doesn't have to always be at the highest end. It can be in the middle. It can be
Yeah.
different elements of it, but that's necessary, I think, as we move forward.
Well, and
That
I
was the
think
cool part
off.
about the Harris presentation. It was just kind of tactical around how do we measure? How
Yeah,
do we tell? Where are we willing to spend more? And I think, speaking of vulnerability, that was a perfect example. But maybe nothing was more vulnerable than the AMA. Um, that was very interesting as well.
I was going to say that was another new format that we came up with and introduced this year, which was to put a group of industry leaders on the stage with really no framework to what was going to happen.
what an
And
amazing group you put on stage.
but to open it up, and we wanted, it came out of a board conversation with one of the content committee members who said, I love Reddit AMA boards, and I think we should try to figure out how to do that at SampleCon. And we put it out on LinkedIn to try to gather questions. We did get some questions that were submitted. I put together some questions that were maybe a little more controversial, just in case we felt like we needed to liven up the conversation. But it took one question that came from a submission prior to the conference before the whole room opened up, and the questions ran the full gamut of things. It didn't all fall into one category. Some of it was, how do I convince my boss that I should be paying more for sample and for the quality? And um, how do I have this type of conversation? And we could have kept that going for another hour because people in the audience felt invested, and the industry leaders who are on the stage, John leading that conversation along with Lisa Wilding Brown and Seema Vasa and David Butler, were willing to answer from their experiences. And that might have been actually my favorite part. And that wasn't an early morning activity. It was an end of day on Tuesday, and we had a packed room of people who wanted to participate.
And it was perfect for me because I didn't have to prepare, I didn't have to do a presentation, and I got to pontificate. So, yay. I will also say, the gentleman who asked the question, it was on incentives. How do I,
You're right.
talk
That's what
to
it was.
folks about incentives, paying more, being more strategic? I actually connected him with Frank, who is the industry leader in research on incentives. So there was actually action taken after that. I introduced them, and Frank's got paper after paper that he can now take back to his company and really start to build an argument for we should be doing this a little bit differently.
And I think that's unique to SampleCon. I mean, I go to industry events and, I mean, I joke every year that I will never put exhibit space at the conference because it changes the whole dynamic of the event. And there is lots of opportunity throughout the industry to do those exhibit spaces. But because we're small, because we have so many people who know each other and are connected, the second somebody comes and says, who do I talk to about X or Y?
Yeah.
Everyone at the conference, it's not just the SampleCon board, but the attendees feel just as invested in connecting each other to facilitate really
Yeah.
good conversations. And, um, I always tell new attendees when they come and they've registered that if there's somebody they want to meet that's on the attendee list, and as everybody knows, we make our attendee list live, it's on our website. Anyone and
Yep.
everyone can see who's attending our conference. Um, I'm always happy to do that introduction because I view that as my most important role is to help facilitate the conversations. I'm not the expert to answer all of the questions, but I can be the connector to do that. And that is incredibly important as we look to the future of this space and we look to how we work together and collaborate to deal with the challenges, whether it's synthetic data, whether it's data quality, whether it's how we better utilize humans in research in the future. All of those things only are going to happen by having those conversations.
Yep.
And
So
that's
we've
one of
been
the
chatting
reasons
for
I
a
like.
while. Oh, go ahead,
Yeah.
Chuck.
I was just going to say, and that's one of the reasons I really like this conference. With the no exhibitors, it does change the dynamic. You have authentic conversations. You work to connect with people that you want to connect with to have meaningful
Yeah.
conversations. And it just has a general different feel than a lot of other events. And I really like it for that.
Yeah. And again, I get to see the greatest people in the world. I love you guys.
Yeah.
It's fun.
They're my people. I always tell my wife, this is my people. It's
It's
One of the
fun.
most
dirty
fun
like
things
me.
to one of the fun things to see that's happened over the years, and this was totally unintentional, but I think partially because we're choosing these resort type locations, people come to SampleCon early. They
Yep.
arrive Saturday or Sunday, and then often they
Yeah.
come in with spouses or children. And I've had people anecdotally say to me, like, this is the first time my child is like understanding what I do as a business, right? And where my career is. And many of you who've attended SampleCon have met some combo of my children as I've dragged them to the conference over the years and had them volunteering. But it humanizes our industry and it brings us together, and it really is a very unique community of people who are interesting and who are making a difference in the world, whether we feel it all the time or not. And I love that we get to do that
Well,
once a
I
year.
think that
I would love to do it more.
yeah, I think that's a great segue into the closing comments. I titled this A New Hope, and you know, we haven't solved everything we need to do to restore trust in everything we're doing. There's still more topics to come on AI, both a friend and a foe, and organizational structures and things of that nature. But people are putting out solutions, and I think they're taking them seriously, and they're willing to experiment and move things forward. And this was one of the first events I've been to in a long time that I came out hopeful. Now, people have to continue and keep taking it forward. There's often sort of the shine of a conference or a talk or something of that nature that gets thrust down. But I don't think that's the case. I really came away exhilarated. I came away thinking we're not there yet, but we've made progress. And as long as we continue to make progress, we'll continue going forward. So, any last things you guys would like to leave us with?
I'm happy it made you optimistic, John. It feels like maybe
Yeah.
that means we hit a good mark. So
It was worth the conference if John is optimistic. I like your way of thinking. That's good.
I feel like we won. I, and there's no winning in this, obviously, but it makes me feel good, and it makes me feel like I'm like honored to be surrounded by the people that I get to be surrounded with and to work with. And I would just say that SampleCon and those who are at the conference and those who know me hear me say this all the time, but SampleCon isn't about me. It isn't about my board, although they are the most incredible group of people. It isn't about the committee that I work with on GDQ, although they are equally incredible. But it is about the community of people who come and participate at the conference, who come and say, this is important. And so, anyone who wants to be involved, who wants to be part of this, it is open for everybody. It's not a closed group. When I first started in this industry, someone said to me, it's like going to a high school reunion. And if you didn't go to that high school, it's really hard to break in. I have worked for 12 years to change that. And hearing you talk about what it was like, John and Chuck this year, it's worked. The needle has moved.
Yeah.
It feels like it is SampleCon is owned by the industry, and I want to continue to move towards that.
Chuck, any parting words from your?
No, let's close on that. Just to reiterate, great people, authentic conversations, fantastic format. Well done putting the content together, guys, and putting the event together. It was great. And like you, John, I think that I left feeling a little more hopeful than I have in years past too.
Awesome.
Time to plan for 2027.
Yep.
In LA or Pasadena, if I'm correct.
We'll be back in Pasadena at the Langham again.
Awesome.
Not
Not
as far to
32 hours
travel.
outside of the airport, so we're good.
Uber accessible.
It's awesome. Anyways, thanks, guys. I really appreciate you
Thank
throwing this
you.
Thanks
together
for
as
having
well.
us, John.
Yeah. Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Yeah.
Wow.